right, so now we've laid out the entire process of developing a risk management plan. Now what you need to do is take the next step and begin to identify certain risks. Managing risks is a complex and critical issue that focuses heavily on using information appropriately to reduce the likelihood of surprise and the impact of a negative event or crisis. It is a process of assessing potential threats and vulnerabilities, determining the probability of them occurring over time, and the impact of the occurrences. Then developing strategies that prevent, protect, mitigate, and recover from those threats should they occur. Using information to assess the probability of an incident occurring over time. So, we've now outlined the 6 steps needed to develop a risk management plan. However, your risk management plan is only as good as the way it informs decision making or how you're going to adapt to risk within your enterprise. Managing risk, as we've said before, is complex and a critical issue that focuses heavily on using information appropriately to reduce the likelihood of surprise and impact of a negative event or crisis. It is a process of assessing potential threats and vulnerabilities and determining the probability of them occurring over time and the impact of that occurrence on your enterprise. It then goes on to developing strategies to prevent, protect, mitigate, and recover from those events should they occur. The framework presented on this slide is a useful model for risk-based decision making. You need to deal with threats in the red area, but not lose sight of those colored blue because of their impact. When making decisions about risk, it often becomes a resource issue, i.e., how many people do you have? How much money do you have? How much information do you have to apply to the problem? Thus, the framework helps determine where resources should be properly allocated. Another critical component of any risk management strategy is assessing the impact of decisions that are taken in a crisis. The crisis risk formula shown on the slide is a way to assess the impact of a decision before you're taking it or to do some assessments. Let's break down the formula. In the formula, TR refers to threat reduction. It might be as simple as restricting access to a server room. Cost, which is on the other side, and we'll discuss in a second in more detail, are those things that are incurred by the organization in the execution of threat reduction. The ancillary benefits are what might be considered an additional or even unintended benefit of a particular action. Using our example, an ancillary benefit of securing the server room might be an increased awareness within the organization of the importance of security. On the other side of the equation, I mentioned cost earlier. Costs may be financial, such as the expense of installing a keypad access to the server room, but also can be less tangible things, such as the erosion of organizational unity, or significantly more valuable, such as the estimate of casualties in using military force to resolve an issue. The CR or the countervailing risks are another part that needs to be assumed. By installing the keypad to secure the server room, a countervailing risk might be whether the system is connected to the internet and thus susceptible to hacking anyhow. We might assume the target went through such a process at a number of different stages prior to the crisis. Let's first consider the decision process that gave the system-wide access to the HVAC company, which ultimately provided access into a target system. In the case, the threat reduction was the ease of maintaining constant temperature at target server room by allowing a third-party vendor to monitor the HVAC remotely. An ancillary benefit might have been other services provided by the company. Undoubtedly, the choice of a small company was based upon its competitive expense that the cost of target would incur for the service. The countervailing risks, which should have been examined and were not, was that the HVAC's cybersecurity process. The impact of failing to accurately assess these decisions became quite evident. So what happened once the breach was discovered? Earlier in this topic, we talked about resilience as the opposite end of the risk continuum from warning. Since agility and resourcefulness is an important part of resilience, I've decided to discuss it in greater depth here. Homeland Security's framework for establishing critical infrastructure resilience goals, 2010, offers a basic definition of resilience as the ability to reduce the magnitude or duration or disruption of an event. Resilience is ultimately an outcome based upon a program focusing on four abilities. Robustness, the ability to absorb shocks and continue operating, or continuity of operations. Resourcefulness, skillful management of an unfolding crisis. This is what we might call emergency planning or crisis response. Rapid recovery, the ability to get services back online, which may be enhanced by redundancy or backup systems. And adaptability, which is incorporating lessons learned from past events. Successful resilience requires emergency and continuity planning, risk modeling, exercises, education and training, and mutual assistance. A couple of these terms are new but critical. Mutual assistance refers to agreements among jurisdictions or entities that promise aid in times of need. Teams of power workers coming to an area of a blackout. Education is an example of that. Education and exercises are just what they sound like. How do you educate people to be resilient? Perhaps you provide survival kits. And exercises are live or tabletop events that allow people to practice what's going on, thus familiarizing them with the possible crisis. Policy process in risk management is another thing that we need to talk about. The policy process associated with risk management introduces another level of complexity that may enhance or hinder the ability to provide the warning that mitigates risk. The best policy is one that is informed by lessons learned and responds with adaptation. We will talk later in the course about after-action reports that contribute to this. Operationally, after-action reviews highlight differences between policies, the ideal world, and operations, the real world, contributing to this reevaluation. Furthermore, broad dissemination of action reviews enhances the broader security and managing of the environment. Dissemination of after-action reports should be considered part of an alliance component also. Thus, we get an idea of what we're looking at here in the policy side of things. Leadership in a crisis is different from normal leadership, and that's reflected in Eisenhower's comments on the slide. The characteristics that are listed are the reflections of Lieutenant General Williams, the commanding officer of the Defense Logistics Agency, which he made during a presentation at Penn State in the fall of 2018. These provide good guidance, but can be supplemented by some important considerations in a crisis. According to the Harvard Business Review, leadership in crisis means taking a moment to figure out what is going on, take prompt but not hurried action. Here is a spot where the planning is critical, obviously, because if the leader has not considered possible actions prior to the crisis, the results may be devastating. Managing expectations is a third part of the process of a leader. Target's leadership failed to manage expectations when they spoke about the credit service credentialing while ignoring the possible impact to the customers of having their credit card data stolen. Well, we've come to the end of the lesson. We've thrown a lot of information at you here, and let me try to summarize just a couple of things that we talked about that I think are critical. The timeline of uncertainty provides a visualization of the risk crisis process and its component parts. Understanding the types of risks faced by an organization, that would be both environmental, both internal and external, as well as the potential failures, is the foundation of a risk management strategy. Effective risk management is a layered process involving assets, allies, and adaptability. Effective use of information improves the allocation of limited resources available for risk management. And risk and crisis management, although connected, are different, but are equally complex processes that are impacted by policy and leadership.